was so afraid I'd get out of law school and be selling shoes. My mom works in a school cafeteria, my sister in a hospital laundry, so selling shoes is the nicest job a girl from my family's supposed to get.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jake Smith, and this is From the Cinema. I had the pleasure recently of attending the Middleburg Film Festival, where I had the pleasure of seeing Certain Women, the newest feature by American auteur Kelly Reichardt. Reichardt is a neorealist filmmaker who embraces minimalistic technical elements, be they in her editing, her framing, or even her narratives. In her films, Reichardt explores characters that are existentially drifting. She purposely frustrates in her narratives by both letting these characters drift like specters across the frame, and by obscuring their motivations or attempts at breaking free from their existential crises. The result is a more honest interpretation of how we attempt to find comfort and purpose in a society that grows more and more ultra-comfortable and, conversely, also more aimless. Certain Women continues this tension. The film is constructed with 3 extremely loose stories intertwining of women trying to make it in Montana. Each section is distinct in purpose, but ultimately coheres in an empathetic examination of alienation and loneliness. The film flows much like an anthology film in its construction, so I'll go through section by section and then tie everything back together to understand it in a more cohesive way. Section 1 deals with Laura, a lawyer who is representing a disgruntled ex-worker who has been effectively scammed out of a lot of money by his place of work after he is injured on site. The employee has been seeing Laura for many months and demands a second opinion from a male colleague who essentially tells the worker the same thing. The worker has a fight with his wife and then is driven home by Laura, who can barely tolerate his moping and violent threats. Later that night, he holds a guard hostage at his former place of work and forces Laura to go through his file, which details how he was cheated out of his money. He lets the guard and Laura go eventually, on the condition she gives him a head start. She refuses, and he is arrested. Right off the bat, we see a critique of a system by which the worker has been once a part of. His place of work cheats him out of a large sum of money, and he cannot make a living for himself. As a result, he lashes out. Laura, however, remains neutral to this economic exploitation. She refuses to get embroiled in his agitation against the bourgeois, but never directly tries to exploit him herself. Laura instead tries to find social cohesion, a sort of middleman in between exploitation and violence. Rather, it is the more individualized violence that perturbs her. Watching from her car as the worker and his wife fight elicits some of her most physicalized disgust. Her breaking moment is when the worker, now in her car, delivers a 1-2 punch of misogyny and threats of violence, to which Laura both screams at him and then drops him off by the side of the road. Laura's reaction to this is a byproduct of her willful ignorance of class consciousness. When the violence becomes personal, she reacts accordingly, but cannot try to find a way to help the worker out legally. It's an honest portrait of American class ignorance, and I commend Reichardt for not only depicting such a dynamic, but for also making it empathetic. The next section deals with Gina, a mother and wife, whose family is building their home ground up. She's frustrated by her husband's undermining of her authority for their teenage daughter, who is on eye-roll mode at all times. Gina and her husband stop by Albert's home, an old man who lives alone and has an abundance of sandstone in his yard. The couple and Albert negotiate a deal for Albert to give them the sandstone. Albert often interrupts Gina in favor for talking to the husband. He eventually cedes the sandstone to the couple, and when Gina comes to pick it up, she notices Albert watching from a window. She waves at him, but he does not wave back. This section of the film is the weakest by far. The strongest element, though, is how Reichardt examines motherhood as it is attached to womanhood. Gina works hard to find familial cohesion, but is met with obstructions by her daughter, who disrespects her outright, and her husband, who does little to nothing to stand up for his wife and, as the previous section revealed, is cheating on Gina with Laura. Their interaction with Albert, who is more clearly misogynistic, is indicative of how Gina is undermined by men. It is an honest section, but is also the least interesting to watch. Reichardt does not find any way to make the interplay between Gina and her obstructions and create a formal outlook. Rather, she chooses to let the script do all the heavy lifting, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but just disappointing and boring to watch. The last section of the film is by far the most interesting of the bunch, and the most effective. Jamie, a Native American rancher who single-handedly takes care of a horse farm during the winter months, starts to take an educational law class at a local night school, not out of interest in the material, but rather as a way to connect with someone. She formed something of a bond with the teacher, Beth. Reichardt's cinematography in this section, where streetlights barely shine through the cold night and cafes stretch wide, creates a sense of melancholy akin to the painting Nighthawks. She also edits the section rhythmically and slowly, letting the mundane activities that Jamie does at the farm become redundant. A more insecure filmmaker would prop the budding relationship between Beth and Jamie at the foreground, but Reichardt does not shy away from the drudgery of work that Jamie is involved with. The audience getting to break the mundane work elements with Jamie helps solidify why Jamie is looking for this companionship in the first place. It makes it more heartbreaking when Beth stops teaching the class outright. The ending of this section, a tired Jamie falling asleep at the wheel and driving into a vast, empty farm plot, is as effective as it is melancholic. Through these sections, we see strings of thematic tissue tie together, especially with the relationships by which these women come to be a part of. It is a wholly feminist film, one where men are mostly depicted chasing after some sort of more rural masculinity, and the women are left putting together the pieces. The last section, too, deals with a certain queer lensing that, while maintaining ambiguity. As Beth and Jamie ride a horse together, they enter a locomotive connection that is intimate and personal. It is a triumph of queer narrative. My issues beyond the frustrating second section is mostly rooted in neorealism's inability to speak with a necessary audience. Reichardt's film falls under the trap of rural silence, where characters simply don't speak to each other in an attempt to elicit some sort of honesty about rural life. A film like this is meant to humanize and create an empathetic space to examine working-class conditions, but such a film is never going to be for anyone within the working class. Rather, neorealism and minimalism is for elitist sensibilities and wealthy moviegoers. I have a hard time imagining a farmer from Montana connecting with a film like this, but then again, perhaps this reveals something about my own interpretation of the world rather than the film's. I would recommend seeing Certain Women, with the caveat that it is indeed a very slow movie. It is also one of the better movies from the year. I give it a solid 8 out of 10. If you want to tell me why I'm wrong, you can look me up on Twitter at JakeInLimbo. Thank you for watching From the Cinema. I'm Jake Smith, and I hope to see you next time.
We were wondering about the sandstone in the front yard. I mean, if you wanted to get rid of it, we'd take it off your hands.
You don't have to sell it if you don't want to. It's just that Gina wants this new house to be authentic.